Transhumanism is the philosophy that states that technology should be used to guide human evolution. It holds that the human body is nothing more than a vehicle for the human mind, and as such, the human body should be malleable to the human will. One can argue that cybernetics, by their very nature, are a transhumanistic enterprise, particularly bioware, usually installed in a human being, to improve already organic material. However, some people that embrace the transhumanist ideology go to such lengths at transforming their bodies that it can be debatable whether or not they are still really human. Though this is not quite the same thing as a mask cult, at least not for the first groups we're going to mention. There is enough similarity between how these groups and the future of 2100 operate that the comparison to a mask cult is just. We will go with them in the order of how they are normally encountered by someone living upon Earth. The first group are called the Orbies, short for orbitals. The Orbies dwell in the orbital stations around Earth, the Moon, Mars, and the stations of the asteroid belt. Most Orbies make their living as deep space explorers. Many Orbies are members of organizations that are trying to push Earth, to push out past the asteroid belt, out to Saturn and Jupiter, and the beyond. Orbies have very tight-knit families, not surprising considering that the demands of vacuum life would be very stressful. They also tend to be that person in the white hat. If you're in trouble in space, the Orbies are going to come save you. The laws of space, which closely mirror the laws of sea travel in the ancient world, are sacrosanct. However, the Orbies are going to charge you an arm and a leg to save you. Where Orbies start to resemble a mask cult is in their use of cybernetics to modify their body. Many Orbies will actually consider going to full conversion cybernetics. Now, amongst the Terran population of Earth, this number hovers just under or just above 10%, but amongst the Orbi community, this number is nearly 33%. Radical transformation of the human body through cybernetics, not even if it's full conversion, is still a common sight. Most Orbies will have their legs converted into strange, by Terran standards, cybernetic limbs that have prehensile feet and multi-jointed legs. And they do this because of the environment they work in, usually zero-G or light gravity. It's more advantageous for them to do so. They will have survival gear for vacuum implanted in their bodies, as well as go through some genetic modification to make their bodies more durable to the radiation and other elements that might hit them in space. Loss of bone density, for instance, from prolonged space travel, is largely corrected by nanites and strengthened bone cybernetics and bioware. While the Orbies will heavily modify themselves cybernetically and favor a lot of metal because it will endure space travel, they don't have a particular dress code or a particular look, other than practical and plain. Their ethic tends to be pretty family-oriented, and this excludes any religious choices or ethical and moral paradigms. But the one thing the group shares in common is a disdain for people they call dirt boys or dirt girls. Essentially, anyone living upon Earth, Luna, or Mars. Which brings us to the next group, the Lunars. Lunars are descendants of the first human populations of the satellite. They actually fairly resemble human beings as far as their skeletal structure. And no one's quite sure when the decision to modify their look took place. But most Lunars will either have their hair changed to some strange occurring color, such as bright pink or flashy purple, or have their skin pigmented slightly so that it looks pale. It may have been that the initial genetic dispensation of the moon, mostly populated by Caucasians, may have caused this aesthetic. However, the paleness of most Lunars is not the kind of paleness found in the human genome. Many of them can appear almost motley. Cyberware amongst the lunars is also pretty heavily apparent, normally in the advent of eyes, ears, and medical apparatus. Strengthened bones is a common cybernetic bioware enhancement, since with its lighter gravity, for a lunar to come to Earth, he has to be prepared. Although this is very discomforting to them when they're home, they will do it because travel between Earth and the Moon is quite common. Though they're not cult-like, as a mass cult might be, most lunars are fairly isolationist. Oh, they're perfectly willing to take an Earther or a Martian's money. What they're not prepared to do is let you marry their daughter. What they're not prepared to do is to invite you into their home. And this clannish behavior sort of convinces most people they're like a mass cult. The lunars don't believe they are the end-all be-all of humanity like most Orbeez do, but they do feel slightly superior to people from Earth. Most of the lunars have relatives that dared everything to set up these first colonies. It can be argued that when you're living in an orbital, some of the first sky stations that Earth placed in orbit, for instance, to begin its conquest of the solar system, that rescue isn't that far away. You hop in an escape pod and do a re-entry and make a splashdown. But in those initial days where you were 6 days away from Earth for help, and everything had to be done by you, it kind of set a mental attitude. Lunars tend to be self-reliant. They also tend to be stubborn. They tend to be creative. They also tend to be stubborn. They can be insightful into a person's character and highly perceptive on social cues. They can also tend to be stubborn. Have you seen a theme yet? Most lunars are renowned for being strong-headed and very domineering personalities. Then we get to what can only be called the Greys. Originally called the Lunar Greys because this group, which is very much like a mass cult, grew out of the lunar movements. The Greys actually take it upon themselves to resemble bad science fiction aliens. The already motley skin they have from their lunar ancestry is heightened and dispensed so that it's a consistent grayish white along their entire frame. Eyes and skulls are often altered to appear like those in the movies. Ovular heads, large black eyes, small mouths, no ears and nose. Why someone would willingly do that to themselves seems insane, but consider that during the history between Earth and the Moon, there was a brief period of time when the Moon wasn't on very good speaking terms with Earth, or with Mars for that matter. And some people, taking patriotism to the next level, began to emulate their mascot, because in those initial days of settlement, the NASA crews and other crews from around the world adopted the little gray-headed alien as their symbol. It may seem extreme, but consider what some religious fanatics do when they allow themselves to be crucified like Jesus. The Greys, unlike the Lunars, do have a set philosophy. They believe that humanity can only advance if it advances out into the stars. They are the most heavily involved mass cult involved in interstellar travel and funding the drives and things that may be needed to take humanity to the next level of technological and evolutionary superiority. Then we get to Mars. Most Martians look human. Most Martians are sane. But there are two mass cults notable on Mars because of a series of, well, I think very excellent science fiction novels, but most people would assume very bad science fiction novels. These are the Taurans and the New Thrax. Edgar Rice Burroughs, the creator of Tarzan, wrote a series of planetary romances centered around a Southern cavalryman named John Carter. Most of these adventures took place on a planet he called Barsoom, Mars. Rice's imagination was very vivid, creating rivers such as the Issus and cultures such as the Thrax, the cities of Helium Prime, the beautiful Deja Taurus, from which the Taurans take their name. The Taurans as a group have gone to lengths to make them look like the, quote, red men of Mars from the novels of Edgar Rice Burroughs. They have their skins pigmented to be reddish orange. They have temperature tolerances placed in their bodies. Strengthened bones, another common cyber bioware enhancement, is placed in them to help retard bone loss from the lighter gravity. They tend to walk around, let us say they walk around clothed but barely just, and they tend to have attitudes on personal honor and violence that are somewhat at odds with a civilized society. Much like the Tro and other fantasy players upon Earth, the Taurans tend to keep this, however, amongst themselves, though it can lead to some interesting social conflicts when you find one drinking on Utopia Planitia, named after another science fiction series that was popular. As a group, the Taurans value physical strength, cunning, the warrior ethic, and feats of daring. They often hold games where physicality is challenged or inventiveness and cunning tested. Though this may seem like obsessive compulsive behavior, especially since the Taurans, emulating Deja Taurus, have a tendency to lift much of their own cultural tradition within their subcult from the Ricean novels, there is a group that goes even further. Accepting full conversion bodies with multiple limbs installed, some Martians, the most fanatical, accept the title Nuthruk. The Nuthruks, made in homage to the Thrax of Rice's novel, are 10-foot tall cyber frames with 4 arms. Though the frames often don't have any weapons of their own, they are often enhanced with greater strength and speed and resiliency. The Nuthruks make up almost 10% of the Martian population, and the Taurans make up almost 25%, which means nearly a third of Martians are part of a Masque cult, a number that would be unthinkable upon Earth. Yet, due to the pressures of living out so far in the solar frontier, the governors have to turn a blind eye to it because, well, the Taurans make up a significant part of the workforce, and the Nuthruks are useful. When your brain's in a 10-foot tall cyber frame capable of lifting tons of material, you make one heck of a construction worker, and most Nuthruks are involved in construction, maintenance, legal enforcement, and the military of the planet. Not so easy to laugh at them now. Unlike the Taurans, who, although they will refer to themselves by Ricean titles when they're in their own small gatherings, the Nuthruks use this lingo all the time, refusing to call the governor of the Mars governor, but instead only referring to him as the High Jedak, refusing to obey laws that often seem, well, restrictive of personal combat, particularly dueling over honor. The Nuthruks have been both bane and boon for the planet, yet the Martians cannot deal without them. The bodies are further modified to look like the green insectoid creations of Rice's novel. Titles and a whole language have been invented, as well as a worship of the goddess Issus, which some explorer, way back when, who was probably a fan of the novels, decided to name the first canal and waterworks the planet had made. It is not, I suppose we should say, it is forgivable to assume the associations and the homages to the fantasy that inspired the science that got man to Mars, or the moon, or the asteroid belts. But when you see some maskers take it so far, one begins to doubt the sanity of leaving the soil of Earth.